Mill constantly compared my less-than-ideal pregnancy to Syl's flawless one. For 9 months after Syl gave birth, she and my husband cut ties with Mill completely. My husband and I have been married for over 2 years now and have been together for 7. He is truly amazing, the man of my dreams, and I cherish our life together. My parents and the rest of my family adore him, too. Coming from a large Mexican family, I've been fortunate that no one has ever said a negative word about him. He treats everyone with kindness, which is one of the reasons I fell for him in the first place. We are a great team and rarely argue, except when it comes to his mother. Mill is a challenge, to put it mildly. Compared to my sprawling family, my husband's family is quite small. Aside from his parents, he has a sister who recently got married. His parents embody the typical conservative small-town Christian archetype, and his mother is especially protective, often to the point of being overbearing. She insists on family time during the holidays, and if we don't comply with her wishes, she makes a scene. When I met his family for the first time, I hit it off with his dad right away. He's relaxed and easygoing. His sister, who returned home from college 2 years ago, also treats me like family. However, my interactions with his mother were fraught. She would often make absurdly sexist comments. For instance, when they asked about my job and I mentioned I was a marine biologist focused on conservation, Phil was enthusiastic, but Mill merely frowned in silence. I brushed it off at first, but later Phil called my husband to express that Mill wanted him to break up with me. She claimed I wasn't the right woman for her son because I didn't fit her traditional mold of femininity, primarily because I have a job. I love my career and being a scientist, and my husband has never pressured me to abandon my ambitions or settle into a domestic role. If he had, we wouldn't be together. But Mill had different ideas. She complained that with my well-paying job, I might not become a housewife after marriage and suggested he could do better. My husband firmly told Phil to let his mother know that his choice of partner was none of her concern. I appreciated his support, and it reassured me to stay in our relationship despite her opinions. Unfortunately, as our relationship deepened, Mill's behavior only worsened. Her initial snide remarks escalated into more pointed jabs. Whenever we were alone, she would suggest that a proper wife should focus on homemaking, asserting that I didn't fit the mold of a woman suitable for her son because I lacked traditional femininity. Initially, I thought she was joking, but her persistence made it clear she was serious, which left me shocked by her mindset. One evening, during a dinner she insisted we attend, Mill launched into a rant about how she longed for a time when women took care of their families while men earned a living. My husband retorted that times had changed and that he was lucky to have a partner who shared household responsibilities. Mill shook her head and insisted that women should behave like women and men like men. I recognized that she was targeting me directly, but I tried to remain calm. Phil urged her to ease up, but her frustration mounted when she saw he wasn't backing her up. She continued her tirade, insisting she only wanted what was best for her son, and then fixed her gaze on me. Having heard enough, I quietly stood up from the table and asked my husband to take me home, which he readily agreed to do. He shot his mother a disappointed look as we walked out together. Later, when Phil called to smooth things over, I made it clear that it wasn't Mill's place to dictate who her son could marry, nor should she criticize me for having a job. Phil apologized on her behalf, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. My husband backed me up, stating that if Mill didn't apologize, he wouldn't return to see her. Perhaps his ultimatum pushed her to relent, and she eventually agreed to stop discussing the topic. I was able to brush off that encounter, but the underlying tension remained. A few months later, when my husband and I moved in together, before we tied the knot, Mill's behavior took another turn for the worse. I had a research expedition planned for several weeks, and upon learning about it, she called to ask who would take care of the house and her son. I was baffled by her inquiries and put her on speakerphone so my husband could hear. When I questioned her logic, she accused me of being immature for wanting to go on these expeditions and insisted I should focus on being a good partner. My husband was furious and asserted that he didn't need anyone to take care of him. We were equal partners sharing responsibilities. Mill retaliated by claiming we couldn't get married because I didn't know how to be a proper wife. My husband told her to mind her own business and hung up. When he proposed, Mill was visibly upset, and her discontent grew when she found out we planned a small wedding. With my large family to consider, it would be financially impractical to invite everyone, so I planned to celebrate with them separately later. Mill insisted on inviting her friends, whom she hadn't seen in ages, claiming our wedding was the perfect occasion. When my husband asked if she would be covering their meals, she took offense, arguing that as his mother, she deserved a say in the matter. We were unimpressed by her response and made it clear we were committed to our small wedding plans. If she invited anyone beyond our guest list, she would bear the cost. While she wasn't pleased, there was little she could do to change our minds. During the wedding, she loudly criticized everything, especially my gown. I chose to ignore her comments and acted as if she were invisible. I didn't want to let her negativity ruin my special day. Did her best to keep Mill away from me for the rest of the evening. Last year, in mid-April, we received wonderful news. I was pregnant. After trying for a while, we decided to wait until I was about 9 weeks along to share the news with our close family and friends. Mill was furious that she wasn't the first to know. She called to express her disappointment, insisting that as my husband's mother, she had the right to be informed first. I told Mill that we preferred to wait before sharing such significant news and suggested she could voice her complaints directly to my husband, as I wasn't in the mood to hear her lectures on what a good woman should do. Just a month after I announced my pregnancy, Sil revealed she was also expecting. We were both shocked and delighted, thrilled at the prospect of welcoming a new family member. Sil wasn't married yet, but she had a serious long-term boyfriend whom we all liked. I anticipated that Mill would make a fuss about Sil's pregnancy coming before marriage, which she did, but my husband supported his sister, and eventually, Mill had to accept it. Phil was overjoyed at the thought of having 2 grandchildren at once. As Sil and I both navigated our pregnancies, we began to spend more time together. We leaned on each other for advice and support during this magical yet challenging journey. Together, we shopped for baby essentials and designed our nurseries. However, Mill began to compare our pregnancies incessantly. As if it were a competition, she would make comments suggesting that Sil was better suited for motherhood because she had always been a homemaker, while I continued to work. Mill's snide remarks became more frequent. Whenever I experienced morning sickness, she would compare me unfavorably to Sil, insisting that her pregnancy was smoother, implying that my body wasn't as suitable for carrying a child. Although I tried to brush off her comments, they still affected me, and Sil felt just as frustrated. When it came time for my gender reveal party, I asked Sil to find out the baby's gender from the doctor so she could prepare the envelope. She did the same for her own reveal. Mill was furious when she discovered this. She had a meltdown at our doorstep, accusing me of trying to exclude her from the experience. She insisted my husband should take a stand against me to ensure she could be more involved. My husband couldn't tolerate her tone and asked her to leave, warning that if she continued to speak to me that way, she would be cut off from our child's life permanently. As expected, she made a scene, crying and claiming she only wanted what was best for her grandchild, but she eventually left. Later, we received concerned calls from Phil and Sil, and we filled them in on the chaos. Sil was shocked by her mother's behavior and encouraged me to rest, recognizing that I was clearly distressed after the confrontation. During Christmas, my husband informed Mill that we wouldn't be attending since I couldn't travel long distances. She was furious, arguing that he was abandoning his family. When he refused to change his mind, she hung up mid-conversation. We thought that would be the end of it, but a week later, she texted him, insisting we show up at her house at 4 p.m. He reminded her of our earlier discussion, but she called him, screaming about how he had no right to avoid family and suggesting that I was the one keeping him away. He told her it was a joint decision, but she continued to scream, demanding he exert control over me. It became increasingly clear to me how toxic and controlling Mill was, and I shared my concerns with my husband and Sil. They both agreed that she was crossing boundaries and supported me, but dealing with her was exhausting. When it came time for me to give birth, I unexpectedly went into preterm labor at 33 weeks, and after all attempts at a natural birth failed, I had an emergency C-section at 34 weeks. Once my husband confirmed that both our son and I were okay, he announced the birth in our family group chat and informed my relatives. Everyone was excited and congratulated us, but Mill again had a meltdown about not being notified of my labor or the baby's arrival. She bombarded us with messages, insisting she should have been in the delivery room to witness her grandchild's birth. It was absurd, as I would never have allowed her in there, but I didn't engage with her delusions since I was focused on my newborn. When we shared our son's name, she called my husband in tears, claiming it sounded too Mexican and insisting we choose something different. My husband stood his ground, saying he liked the name we had chosen. Mill suggested it could be our son's middle name, but we ignored her insistence, and she continued to fuss about it. When it came time for her to meet our son, she insisted on calling him by a completely different name, which surprised us both. She attempted to justify it by saying it would be her special name for him, but my husband firmly told her to stop. She was also displeased that I was breastfeeding because it meant she wouldn't be able to hold him all the time. She suggested I switch to formula so she could spend more time with him. My mother, present during the conversation, informed Mill that newborns needed breast milk, but Mill persisted, arguing it wasn't fair. As you can imagine, her taunts and controlling behavior became increasingly unbearable and evident to everyone around us. The final straw came when she invited me out to lunch, insisting she had something important to discuss. Despite my attempts to cancel several times, she begged me, claiming it was crucial we met. When I finally showed up, she greeted me warmly, and we settled in to order our food. After some small talk, I asked why she had requested this lunch, and that's when Mill broached the topic of our son's godfather. I felt my stomach sink. I explained that Sil and I had already discussed this and decided we would be each other's children's godparents. Mill erupted in tears right there in the restaurant, yelling that I was betraying her. She insisted that Sil already had her family and that I should make her my son's godmother since she had every right as his grandparent. I reminded her that she had claimed Sil was better suited for motherhood, so she should be glad I was choosing someone who would care for my child well. Mill argued that only she could be trusted and demanded to be named my son's godparent. Her unreasonable demands were starting to infuriate me, so I told her firmly that this conversation was over and that she could discuss it with my husband later if she wished. I later told Sil about my lunch with Mill, and she was upset that Mill didn't want her to be our son's godparent. My husband also expressed his confusion over Mill's behavior and began ignoring her calls. Just last week, Sil gave birth to her daughter and asked me to be in the delivery room with her for support since I had been through it. I happily agreed and stayed with her throughout the night while my husband and my mother cared for our son at home. In the morning, after Sil had delivered, I made sure her boyfriend was there to take over the responsibilities. I returned home to rest, grateful for the quiet time with my son. Throughout the day, I received calls from Mill, but I was too exhausted to engage with her and focused on bonding with my baby. Later that evening, my husband returned from visiting Sil, looking amused. I assumed he was thrilled to meet his nephew, but he had even better news. Sil had finally stood up to Mill. Tired of her toxic behavior, she decided to implement a no-contact rule between Mill and her daughter. My husband recounted how, when Mill showed up at the hospital unannounced, Sil instructed the nurses to deny her entry, allowing only Phil to meet the baby. This was shocking to me. I never imagined Sil would take such a bold stance. It became clear why Mill had been trying to reach me all day. She was likely looking to blame me or persuade me to convince Sil to let her see her granddaughter. When I spoke with Sil later, she explained that her decision stemmed from witnessing Mill's actions toward me over the years. Establishing a no-contact boundary was essential to protect her daughter from Mill's toxic influence. This was a wake-up call for Mill, as the consequences of her behavior finally caught up with her. The fallout was severe, and she was completely cut off from her daughter's life, missing out on the early moments of her grandchild's life. This made me reflect on whether it might also be the right choice for us to cut Mill off permanently. Would it be too cruel? Update 1. Hello, everyone. First, I want to express my gratitude for all the supportive comments and advice. It truly means a lot. I didn't expect this situation to gain so much attention so quickly. My husband and I have had no contact with Mill since learning about Sil's decision to cut her off. Although she continues to call, we've chosen to ignore her attempts. After discussing my thoughts with my husband, we agreed that for our mental peace, it would be best to sever ties permanently. There's no guarantee she won't behave with our son the way she has with me. For those wondering why we waited so long, it's important to understand that my husband is the oldest and grew up in a toxic environment, so he didn't recognize how wrong it was until he witnessed Mill's behavior toward me. He has always supported and protected me, but dealing with his mother is just too much. We held a group video call with Sil and Phil, where we discussed our decision, and they are fully supportive. Now we just need to inform Mill. Update 2. If you're ready for a longer update, grab a seat. It's quite the story. Yesterday evening, my husband called Mill to tell her about our decision. When she answered, she immediately started screaming about how long it had been since they spoke and demanded to meet our son. My husband patiently waited for her to finish before calmly agreeing with her, saying he needed to step up and be more of a man. Mill took this as a victory, excitedly affirming that this was what she had always wanted from him. But he interrupted her, stating that as the man of the family, he had decided to cut her off permanently to protect us from her toxic behavior and drama. At first, Mill was speechless, perhaps trying to process what he had said. Once she grasped the seriousness of our decision, she insisted she would come over to meet us and that nothing could stop her. My husband warned her that we wouldn't allow her in and would call the police if she trespassed on our property. She then screamed that I was behind this decision and that I was tearing the family apart. My husband told her to think whatever she wanted, but he was done with her. She continued to yell that he should never have married someone like me, insisting she always knew I was bad news. Naturally, my husband became frustrated and reminded her that we weren't the only ones cutting ties. Sil had done the same. He pointed out that the issue lay with her, and she needed to accept that. Mill then accused me of brainwashing everyone, claiming I had successfully taken her children away from her. Exasperated, my husband told her that if she wanted someone to blame, she should look in the mirror. She was the one being bitter and racist. He stated that everyone was fed up with her and she needed to confront the consequences of her actions. This finally silenced her, and he blocked her number after their conversation. I did the same. I informed my family about the situation and asked them to ignore Mill's calls. I feel bad for my husband and Sil for lacking a supportive mother, but I'm relieved that I won't have to endure such awful situations again. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I'm happy to report that our son is thriving. Sil and I remain close, regularly getting together for playdates. It's heartwarming to see our babies bond, and I hope they become lifelong friends. Additionally, another piece of good news, Sil is finally getting married to her boyfriend, as we all expected. As for the main update, we are still no contact with Mill. For those worried about our safety, don't be, we've installed cameras and changed our locks, ensuring she can't disturb us. I doubt she will confront us publicly since many people are now aware of why we cut her off, which must be embarrassing for her. After we severed ties, Mill tried to persuade Phil to talk to us, but he refused, expressing his own growing frustration with her. I suppose when even her husband started distancing himself, it made her reconsider her actions. A few weeks later, she asked Phil to tell us how sorry she was for everything she had done to me. However, I doubt her sincerity, which is why we've chosen to maintain our distance. My family and Phil continue to visit us and bond with our grandchild, and that's how we plan to move forward.